Hello, welcome back. We finished a season of justice, and that consisted of 8 videos actually. Before that, we did a run of holistic healing videos. We managed 8 of those, and before that, we did signs and seasons, and we managed 10 of those videos. And before that, we did 7 videos under the topic of world order. Now that's a lot of videos, and we haven't had a peace reboot since before world order. So we're due now to try to circle back and make some linkages to the main theme of this channel, which is, of course, peacemaking and peace education. I think there's an overarching theme connecting all of the work we've done from world order through to justice. And it comes through the concept of balance. We've been talking about balance in many different ways, a kind of equilibrium. It's obvious there with justice. We have justice as a form of cosmic balance or rectification, the balancing of the scales. When we talked about healing, we talked about a balance, like a homeostatic balance between the body and the soul, and how one may compensate for the other. When we were doing signs and seasons, we looked at certain balance points in the year, like the equinox, where sun and moon, where the day and night were balanced, because the cycles of the heavens are regular and ordered and repeated, recurring. You have balance manifesting in different ways. Then with world order, one of the concepts we introduced early on was the balance of power, deriving from the European vision of world order, which took root from the Treaty of Westphalia, going all the way back to 1648. Balance is a kind of big archetype. In a sense, our work in peace education and peacemaking is all about balance. We also drew a connection when we were doing healing between peace as conveyed by words for peace in different languages. Shalom in Hebrew, salam in Arabic, shanti in Sanskrit. That there is overtones in these words of a completeness, a perfection in the sense of nothing less left out, and a wholeness. So balance is always a movement towards wholeness. Now, we looked at different sources of law towards the end of our justice transmission. We talked about revelation, something coming from holy books, embodying a message from God. We talked about the exemplars of the founders of religion, their words and their deeds. We talked about the general census of a community, being a source of law, with the collective will or the consensus arising from discussion, balancing out all of the divergent and dissonant opinions found in that body of people. And finally, we talked about reason as an attribute of the individual by which you can think your way through to what's right and what's wrong. Now, these patterns exist in societies, and some societies draw upon one type of source in preference to others. Some use the quartet, some are very fixated on one particular type. In a lot of our modern Western societies, I think the idea of a general consensus as a source of law becomes paramount. A consensus that comes through long accumulation of case-based law or the law-making activity of legislatures and so on. Now, Belinda also really insisted on the importance of thinking things through for yourself, didn't you, Belinda?
Yes.
So that last pillar, namely reason, was certainly bulked large in your consideration, and there's no avoidance of reason, because each one of us, gifted with an intellect, has to think things through for themselves.
That's right.
And if you don't, you won't find any coherence between the conclusions that your mind comes to and what is already embodied as law in your culture. But there are different takes on law. We see massive destruction and war in the world at the moment. And when we see the appalling loss of innocent life and the devastation of property, institutions, schools, healthcare facilities, residential areas, and so on, we often turn to international law, and we hope that it can do something, that it could have teeth. And we look to it and we see that, well, international law has spoken on certain things. It's spoken about codes of war, and it's spoken about encroachment of settlements, and it has made certain rulings, and
But it's ignored.
Well, that is because there are different sources of law that different states run by. So let's say international law is saying one thing and it's calling for truce or a ceasefire. Now, I know we've already mentioned that peace, as we are talking about it here, is not just a truce. It's not just the temporary cessation of hostilities. It's a positive thing. But even the temporary cessation of hostilities is a necessary thing in our world, and craved and yearned for, because people need respite. They need to regather. So if international calls for that, but your home state is based on law, it gives precedence to law that it believes is divine law or revealed law. Remember, that was one of the 4 pillars. And that revealed law is interpreted in a certain way, then that is going to trump what international law is saying. So even though international law is a source of law and represents a kind of consensus of the nations, then essentially religious state, or a state running off a religious ideology, interpreting its own scripture, which originally was a source of revelation, will look to that, and if their interpretation is wrong, not only can great injustice happen, but you will be flouting international law. You'll also be flouting the commands of human reason as well. So just because we can set up 4 pillars of law doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be coherent, and doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be peace. For peace to take place, there has to be a coherence. So the human reason, in its judgment of what is fair and just, needs to see a reflection in the communitarian consensus, be it national or international. It also needs to see that the great fountainheads of law, the founders of the religious traditions, Jesus, Moses, Buddha, Mahavira, Muhammad, that the basic ethical code that they are purveying, enunciating, and living out in their lives is also squaring with your idea of right and wrong. We also need to see that the holy books, which are the repositories of divine revelation, that other pillar of the law, that they are interpreted correctly. Otherwise, you can end up with diametrically different guidance from what it might have been saying. And this is why one Quran can be set against another Quran, one Bible against another Bible. And for example, a lot of the Christian Zionist support for the State of Israel is founded on a particular version of the scripture with loads and loads of footnotes, which is called the Schofield Bible. And it's associated with a view of the world called dispensationalism. So just within Christians, within Christianity, you have a kind of a war going on over law, and other Christians are using other Bibles which are not promoting the same interpretations as the Schofield Bible, and have a different view of end times, eschatology, land claims, etc., etc. That's always something to bear in mind, that just because we have the 4 pillars doesn't necessarily mean the more sources of law you add, the more coherence you're going to get, or even the more likely you are to get a just society. Because at the end of the day, we humans have to make a discernment under our spiritual guidance. And what is your spiritual guidance? How do you know if you're on the right track or not? So we have to attune ourselves very exquisitely, like tuning forks, to be able to discriminate in this area here. Holistic healing depended upon a harmony between the spiritual and the material aspects of the human being, and a balance. Because what happens if we are really immersed indulgently in the material side of life, and our spiritual life doesn't get a look in? It's like exercising one part of your being, but not the other part of your being. Well, there could be the reverse problem too, that somebody could be involved in a very ascetic way of life, great privations, and be divorced from, disengaged from the material, mundane life. And that can be a kind of imbalance too. In the story of the Buddha, he spent the first part of his life completely engrossed in worldly things, and he was spared the vision of anything that might have indicated mortality, disease, death, something, or even something beyond this life. In the second part of his life, he was on a path of privation, deprivation, asceticism, virtually torturing himself, looking for something that was beyond all this. And at the end, he gave up and sat under the Bodhi tree, looking at his life with a different perspective and seeing that, well, that was wrong and that was wrong, or they are incomplete, and found a middle way that led to what Buddhists celebrate as his enlightenment, nirvana. When we looked at mechanisms of healing, we could see that the 7 centers in the etheric field of the human being conducted energies from different levels of being, and that for the spiritual life to be activated and to balance out the material life, the so-called centers above the diaphragm, including the heart and the throat and the brow and the crown, had to be open and functioning. It was suggested that there is a homeostatic balance, so that if some spiritual inactivation existed, then there can be an overcompensation on the material side, and this can manifest as disease in the body. Peace, shalom, is about harmonious balance, which means it's rather like war in the body going on. If you think about our societies, you can see them as body politics. The political community is sometimes called the body politic. I know it's a rather archaic term, but it still has application. And you can have strife in the body politic. Indeed, you can have strife in the global body politic. And that is like a disease of the organism. That's why traditionally there has always been a connection between what we might call sin or error, spiritual error, deviation from the right path, and disease. There's even a line in the scriptures about the wages of sin being death. So sin, disease, demise, death, all manifestations of a kind of imbalance away from the center that needs an equilibration to set right. And peace, of course, shalom, salam, shanti, they are richer terms than just our term peace, but they represent that equilibration. And whenever there is something out of balance, like unbalanced desire, we talked about how there is a cosmic dynamic that brings about rectification of that, whether it's mediated or reflected in our legal institutions or not. There is a cosmic justice. And so the scales are balanced once again. They'll be balanced willy-nilly. Whether we do it ourselves or whether catastrophe has to do it for us. earthquake, tsunami, meteor collision. I mean, we know that in the distant past, there's been mass extinction of species by meteorites, meteors, comets, and like bodies plummeting from the heavens to the earth. There was an article this morning about a meteorite collision with the earth in the earth's infancy a few billion years ago. The earth was very young, but it was much, much more massive than the meteorite that landed in the Gulf of Mexico 66 million years ago and led to the extinctions of the dinosaur and opened the way to the development of the mammals and the angiosperms, the higher evolved forms of animal and plant life. The heavens are in this dynamic exchange and interrelationship with the earth. Not only is the earth a kind of unified living system, it sort of shows the characteristics of behaving that way, but what lies beyond the earth as well, the solar system and the rest of the universe. Don't you think there might be a balance between earth and the extraterrestrial? I'm not talking about little grey aliens here. I'm talking about the zone beyond the earth. And NASA knows that we have to be vigilant against meteors, asteroids that are on a collision path with Earth. Periodically pass through belts of, rock debris circulating in the solar system. Life has been extinguished before, and there's a possibility there could be a devastating impact on life again. But we don't make connections. That one that hit billions of years ago when the Earth was young created the greatest tsunami, I think, that was ever on the planet.
Really?
Yeah, because of the size of the meteorite that collided with the Earth. There'll be a direct relation between how big that rock is that lands and where it lands and how big the disturbance is. And
dinosaurs.
Yeah. And in Signs and Seasons, we looked at the regular order of the heavens, didn't we? And we looked at, everything from the regular order of the heavens to great monuments that have been built at key latitudes by different people, different cultures, and the sacred geometry between them. And we also looked at our solar returns or birthdays and the relationship between people based on their birthdays, the angle on the calendrical wheel that separates them. And what's all that got to do with peacemaking? Well, we mentioned at the time, we foreshadowed at the time that your interactions with other human beings may not be as random as you think they are. Some relationships have a definite sense of destinedness about them, like they are meant to be. But in every relationship, there seems to be a dynamic. That dynamic has to do with an exchange of energy, and that energetic exchange depends upon your energetic blueprint and the other person's energetic blueprint and how they interrelate. And an active intuition with a few principles of understanding can help you better relate to other human beings. And this can mean the difference between peace and war. It can mean the difference between a scary conflict that causes you to break off relationship and be unreconciled, or a creative dynamism that enables you to take these differences within your stride and work in union with your brothers and sisters to build a better world. Knowledge is required. Signs and seasons knowledge is required to be a good peacemaker. And we noted that the festivals of all the religions on the earth are linked to the seasons and the movements of the heavenly bodies. Like Nowruz, the Iranian New Year, like Pesach, Passover, Ramadan, Navratri, all of them, Vesak, to do with some sort of seasonal or heavenly alignment. And energies are high at these times, like at the full moon, and a lot of festivals, a lot of our key religious festivals fall at full moons. Have you noticed that? Passover, Easter, with Wesak or Vesak. Not only are energies high and aspirations are high, because these are the times when human beings are trying to draw closer to their Creator in this enterprise we call religion, which literally means linking back to the source. Religio. You've got a ligament that links like bone to bone, but you've got a religio, which is a linking back to where you came from. And at these times when aspirations are high, religious aspirations, tensions are also high. And so human beings that want to hurt or disrupt other human beings can choose to make trouble, to strike, to initiate hostilities around these festivals as well. That's another reason why peacemakers need to know about them. They're part of peace education. We even gave a specific example of Tisha B'Av in the history of ancient Israel and then in the history of Judaism since the fall of the Second Temple. And the calamitous things that have happened on that particular day. And sometimes there'd be intentionality on the part of the persecutors there. And sometimes it would seem like just a chance coincidence. But dates have a resonance. And if there's a reason why let's say, a human being is an entity, but a people is an entity, it is an ontological reality, a nation or a people or an ethnic group. And so if, as we described, that you go through a year or one cycle of time, and of course there are larger cycles, but if you go through a cycle of time, and in different parts of the cycle, different types of experience are more likely to be experienced, then it's really not surprising that at a similar point in a cycle, the experience could be reiterated, reinforced, underlined, as though to say, take notice. Do you observe these things on an individual and on a collective level? I invite you to do so, and I invite you to do so without superstition, but just using your reason and your intuition and common sense about cycles and periodicity.